Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the hidden psychological mechanics behind our deepest drives and aspirations. Based on some absolutely fascinating research by Sachin Karnik, along with the brilliant philosophical insights of Krishnamurti, we're going to unpack something that literally affects every single one of us. You know, we spend our entire lives striving, reaching, trying to improve ourselves, trying to fix the world. But what is actually fueling all that drive? Let's get right into it. Okay, so let's kick things off with a question that might ruffle a few feathers. It challenges almost everything we're taught about success, purpose, and virtue. What if your most selfless, noble goals are actually just your ego in disguise? Think about it. We usually assume that if our goals are noble, like say, fighting for a social cause, or seeking spiritual enlightenment, or just trying to be a perfectly virtuous person, that we're operating totally without ego. But, well, the source material suggests something entirely different. And frankly, it's pretty startling. So we really have to ask ourselves, why do we constantly strive to be somebody? Society tells us ambition is just another name for progress, right? Like without it, we just stagnate and decay. But if we look a little closer, we really have to wonder whether this relentless ambition is just an escape from our own inner emptiness. I mean, how often do you immediately pull out your phone the exact second you're left alone with your thoughts? We are deeply, deeply frightened of our own inner emptiness, of our nothingness. And any activity that moves us away from that empty feeling, even if it's a supposedly noble activity, is bound to breed conflict, because fundamentally, it's just an escape. Now, consider the classic CEO chasing corporate wealth and power, and compare them to a social reformer seeking utopia or spiritual purity. Society views these two as total opposites, right? We praise the reformer as totally selfless, and we condemn the CEO as greedy, but psychologically speaking, their internal engine is completely identical. No way, right? But it's true. They're both caught in the exact same trap of ambition. The objects they're chasing are different, sure, but the inner psychological movement, that desperate desire to become something, to achieve, to expand oneself, is exactly the same. And this brings us right to the core difference, or actually scratch that, the total lack of difference between personal and impersonal ambition. Krishnamurti puts it perfectly. Is there any difference between personal and so-called impersonal ambition? You want success for the work with which you are identified. Basically, substituting the word I for the state, or God, or humanity, or the cause, it doesn't actually change the underlying ego-driven desire for power. You might call it a worthy impersonal ambition, but the drive? It's identical. You still want success for the work. You want to be the one who achieves it. This whole distinction between personal and impersonal ambition is entirely artificial. To really understand why this happens, we have to peel back the layers of human behavior to reveal the core illusion that traps us. It's called the I thought, or psychological identification. Mistaking a conditioned mental spokesperson for an independently existing absolute self. Think of the I thought like a rogue spokesperson who takes over a company's PR department and then goes around claiming they built the whole business from scratch. We have a mind that collects experiences, memories, hurts, it applies labels to them. But instead of just experiencing those things, a thought pops up that claims ownership. I am an anxious person, or I'm a spiritual seeker. We mistake this temporary, conditioned mental spokesperson for a permanent, ultimate self. This concept brilliantly illustrates the difference between simply navigating the world in a practical way versus building an artificial, rigid identity that we then obsessively defend. Look at functional identification. It's like knowing you're a driver when you get behind the wheel. It's an instrument. It's flexible. It's practical. You obviously need to know your name and how to do your job. But psychological identification? That's deciding you are the best driver on the road and getting absolutely furious when someone passes you. That becomes a prison. That's when you take your beliefs, your worldly successes, or your spiritual goals and declare, this is fundamentally what I am, turning a perfectly good practical tool into a rigid psychological center that constantly needs defending. Whether it's chasing corporate status or spiritual purity, the ego survives through the continuous movement of acquiring the more. More money, more social status, more spiritual knowledge, more virtuous achievements. Because this psychological identity is built on fragile, impermanent things, it literally never feels secure. So it's always looking for continuity by projecting into the future. I'll get that promotion, I'll become totally fearless, or hey, I'll even become the most enlightened person at yoga class. The ego doesn't just have desires, it is entirely sustained by the very structure of desire itself. And this builds into a really tragic, repeating cycle of becoming. It's honestly like a dog chasing its own tail. Step 1. We feel an inner emptiness or void. Step 2, we project a shiny ideal into the future to save us. Wealth, God, a righteous cause, whatever. Step 3, we strive endlessly for that ideal, pouring all our energy into becoming something we're currently not. And then step 4, frustration and renewed emptiness. Because the ideal is just a projection of our own conditioned mind. Achieving it, or failing to achieve it, just drops us right back into the exact same emptiness we were trying to escape in the first place. By constantly looking to the future to see what we should become, we completely ignore and fail to resolve our present actual reality. I mean, how often do we do this? We tell ourselves, I should really be more patient. But by obsessing over that future ideal of patience, we completely fail to look at why we're acting violently or impatiently right now. We're just postponing the work. The ideal, the what should be, acts as a really pleasurable distraction. It completely prevents you from looking directly at what's actually happening in your own mind at this very second. Which brings us to a rather uncomfortable realization. Is trying to save the world just another ego trip? Think about it. If our desire to reform society is driven by our own unconscious need for power, recognition, and self-expansion, aren't we just breeding more conflict? You literally can't bring about peace in the world if your internal state is highly ambitious, competitive, and isolated. As the sources point out, we so often use social causes as a way to avoid dealing with our own internal chaos. We seek a subtle form of power while slapping the label of service on it. Comparison becomes the hidden engine here. Wanting to be more peaceful, more knowledgeable, or more loving than someone else is really just worldly rivalry wearing spiritual clothes. It turns the sacred into a competitive sport. Wherever there's comparison, envy and ambition inevitably follow right behind it. The mind turns absolutely everything into a field of measurement. And the second you start measuring your spiritual progress against someone else's, the self has entered the sacred field entirely disguised as aspiration. So let's really look at the true cost here. The ultimate consequence of this constant drive for power, even noble or impersonal power, isn't peace. It's total isolation. When you're ambitious, you're acting as an isolated entity trying to dominate or achieve. You start viewing other people not as human beings to connect with, but as instruments, obstacles, or benchmarks. This generates perpetual inner friction and leaves the brain completely fatigued. It breeds societal division, prejudice, and hostility. And most tragically of all, it replaces genuine love with psychological dependence. Any movement of the mind to gain authority, even through extreme self-denial or austerity, is fundamentally destructive and enclosing. The man who seeks power or accepts power in any form is fundamentally irreligious. We often think of religion or spirituality as a path to virtue, but when a person uses those disciplines to gain a sense of superiority, they're just chasing power. In short, the ascetic seeking power by giving up all their possessions is playing the exact same psychological game as the politician seeking power through votes. The scoreboard might look different, but the game is identical. Both are just fortifying the ego. So this raises a genuinely fascinating question. Is it possible to live, to work, to relate in this world without this desperate psychological need to become somebody? Can we act without a self-centered motive? And the answer is yes. It is entirely possible to plan, work, create, and navigate daily life using functional intelligence without turning every single activity into a way of validating your psychological identity. But it requires a radical shift in how we observe ourselves. The solution isn't fighting to forcibly destroy the ego. Why? Because the entity trying to destroy the ego is literally just the ego in another disguise. The answer is what's called choiceless awareness, observing our reactions in the active mirror of relationship exactly as they arise, without naming, condemning, or trying to change them. Think of it like watching a storm roll in. You don't try to stop the rain or yell at the clouds, you just observe it. When you see your own greed or ambition pop up, you don't condemn it or try to push it away, you just watch it, cleanly and completely. In that pure observation, the artificial division in the mind dissolves, and the ego finally loses its fuel. When the demand to become somebody ends, vital energy is conserved. When that self-centered movement of becoming finally stops, true universal intelligence and creative quietness can actually operate unimpeded. Just imagine the sheer amount of mental energy you'd free up if you dropped the exhausting process of constantly comparing yourself to others, projecting ideals, and defending this psychological image. You aren't wasting your life trying to fill an inner void anymore. You are simply present, engaging with the world from a place of clarity rather than a place of desperate need. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Perhaps true transformation only happens when we stop trying to become entirely. If you stripped away all your goals, worldly and spiritual, who are you right now? If you put aside the CEO's wealth and the social reformer's utopia, if you drop all the labels and future ideals, what is left? What are you, right in this very second, without your ambition? Exploring that space might just be the most important thing you ever do. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.